Good evening, my friends. This is the Grimflayer. I hope you're all doing very well tonight. I'm here to bring you some analysis of Grand Prix Toronto's top 32 decks, the top 8 of which included 2 Green-Black Rock decks, which makes us very happy. We're very excited about that. So we're going to analyze those 2 decks specifically. I'm also, just for fun, going to take a look at the rest of the top 32 to give you my brief thoughts on all of those, both kind of in a vacuum, as it regards what I think about those deck choices themselves, just kind of an off-the-cuff reaction, as well as stuff that stands out to me that we should watch out for as Golgari players, as BGX players. But real quick, before we get into the analysis, I wanted to show the channel my latest idea in terms of creating content. So basically, you're looking at a Patreon post I wrote a little while back, and I'm looking to launch the idea of playing donation leagues. So basically, the idea behind a donation league, many popular streamers and YouTubers do this, is that a viewer will pay X amount of dollars, and in exchange for that payment, the content creator will play the donor's preferred list through a league. Their entire 75, some people will say, let's go over your 75 before we play it. Some people will say, I'll just play whatever 75 you show me. It's fine. So what I'm thinking here is that I want to link it to my Patreon, and I want to make it retroactive. So in other words, if you are already a donor to the Patreon, if you already support this channel, that money that you donate monthly accumulates toward the goal, the ultimate threshold of getting a league featured, featuring your 75, a league played on this channel for you. So what I'm wondering is, here I kind of want to gauge the level of interest in these donation leagues in general. Number 2, let me know if you'd rather see friendly leagues, which might give us a higher chance to see the deck really spread its wings, a higher chance to put up a strong result, or competitive leagues, which of course brings the highest standard of opposition and the chance at the published list, the competitive 5-0. That's what we all want to see at the end of the day. So, and of course, none of this has to be set in stone. We could take it, on a case-by-case basis. That's totally fine, but let me know if you prefer friendly or competitive leagues. And then here's the big one: what should the monetary threshold be? So I'm throwing numbers around here like 40, 50, 60. Now these are kind of high dollar amounts on the face of it, right? Just for a donation league, 40, 50, 60 is a little high, but remember that my idea for this is to roll it all into the Patreon. So if you're a confidant here, you're donating $5 per month, you get the tier rewards already. Well, let's say we do $50 over the course of 10 months. You just qualify to have your deck featured in a league here. You've reached that $50 threshold. You've donated $50 to the channel. Therefore, you are qualified. So it would be kind of just an additional reward that's more long-term oriented, if that makes sense. And of course, if somebody, let's say they are a confidant, but they want to see their list featured a little bit sooner, there would be an option to make a direct donation, to reach that $50 or whatever it might be. So this would be something that's rolled into Patreon. It's part of the rewards in conjunction with everything else. Everything that you do in terms of supporting the channel all works together. So that's the idea. Let me know what you think of that. Now, this is something that I think I'm not going to be surprised if number 1 gets a lot of yeses, because I think the idea of a donation league in general is pretty brilliant. I think there's a natural desire for people to see their own specific 75 in action. And of course, this is something that I would provide commentary for, maybe even before we start the list, before we start the league, what I think of the list. Of course, during the league, whether it's live or recorded or used in a replay form, all of this stuff, and of course a wrap-up at the end. I will give you my honest feedback, and we'll be able to also put theory into practice. So, as always, guys, let me know what you think about this idea. Let me know what you think about friendly versus competitive for this, or whether we just do it on a case-by-case basis. Let me know what you think the monetary thresholds should be, what's fair, again, considering that people are already very generously donating to this channel, given the current tier rewards. So, I would love to hear the wider viewership's thoughts on that, so let me know. Without further ado, let's talk about the two green-black rock lists. We'll do that first, so if people are here mainly to see that and they're not so interested in me giving my more abbreviated rundown of the rest of the top 32, we can get this covered first. So, unfortunately for us, for all Modern fans really, but especially for the green-black rock fans, there was no video coverage of this GP. This is something that I'm seeing a lot of blowback about, by the way. People are sarcastically saying, oh, great coverage. I really enjoyed watching this. And perhaps rightfully so. It is a little bit disappointing to not see our favorite deck putting up 2 spots at the top tables, but at least we know we're getting the results. At least we know that we can take a look at the exact list and figure out what they're up to. So first of all, congratulations to these 2 players, to these 2 men. The first one is Maxime, and Maxime is on a list that the land base is very similar to mine, except Maxime chooses to play Field of Ruin number 4 in place of what I consider my flex slot, which has been a Twilight Mire in the recent past, but as of my recent change is a Marsh Flats. But you'll note that both Mire and Flats produce black mana, and Field of Ruin does not, except in a kind of an oblique way after you activate it and sacrifice it. So, for all intents and purposes, especially considering the early plays, Maxime is only playing 16 black sources, so once again I refer the channel to Flying Delver's excellent article that in turn references Frank Karsten's excellent work about how many colored mana sources do you need to cast your spells. 18 is the recommended number, 18 black sources in order to cast our Lilianas on turn 3. I play 17. I think 17 is slightly greedy but justifiable. I think 16 is a tad too greedy for my personal tastes. However, the 4th Field of Ruin, if you're going to get greedy for something, it might as well be for the 4th Field of Ruin, because number 1, it's a really effective card in our deck, and number 2, like I said, in an oblique way, it eventually gets you a black source, right? There are plenty of games, you saw one in my most recent league, where we kind of have to take our turn 3 fully or partially off to fix our mana to get that second black source, and then we can play what might have been our turn 3 play on turn 4. Sometimes it's Liliana. In the game I'm referring to, it was Fulminator Mage, and it was still good enough, right? It was still good enough. So, Field of Ruin, for those reasons, is a justifiably greedy inclusion. Field number 4, in my opinion. That's how I'd rate it. It's a little greedy, but it's perhaps justifiably so. That said, I personally don't recommend going below 17 black sources, and Maxime is at 16, so that's the first thing to note. Otherwise, the land base is identical to what I've been playing, so of course I approve of that. We're on the 3-3 Bob and Tracker split, so again, we're seeing a lot of similarities, 3 Skoos, 4 Goyf. The big difference here is the second Kalitas. Otherwise, the creature suite is the same as what I'm up to. Now, the second Kalitas is something that I've criticized in the past. I thought it was just a tad too clunky, and, for a variety of reasons. We've got CMC4, we've got Legendary Rule, we've got the fact that he is a little undersized, just in terms of pure base power and toughness relative to CMC. Compared to our other threats. You're looking at stuff like Tarmogoyf, stuff like Tracker and Ooze that can get really big with a little mana investment. Kalitas, of course, can get big with some mana investment, but the mana investment is a little higher. This base CMC, of course, is higher to begin with, and then the mana investment is a little bit more contextual. You have to jump through a few more hoops to really grow this guy. Therefore, in the past, I have criticized Kalitas as a 2 of. I've always thought it was reasonable, but I thought it was just a little much to main deck 2. In the past, I've said, if you want to play 2 Kalitas, I don't think that's wrong, but I'd rather see the 1-1 split between the main and the side. Now, times have changed a little bit since I made that criticism. Number 1, the Faithless Looting decks, much to my chagrin, have not receded from the format. If anything, they might have gotten a little bit more prevalent in the wake of KCI's banning. I don't have data on that, but they seem just as prevalent, if not more. And number 2, more importantly, remember Kalitas is a lifelinker, and Burn is everywhere right now. Burn is absolutely everywhere, so having a very reasonable, all-around powerful card with a very high ceiling like Kalitas that serves as main deckable Grave Hate and main deckable Burn Hate. Again, kind of a clunky version of both of those things, but he certainly fills those roles nevertheless. Well, I think the 2 main deck Kalitas is a little bit better positioned than it was when I have made some moderate objections to it in the past. I'm still not doing it. I'm still playing basically a 1 of Nile Spellbomb in this role, and I still really, really like that, because of course the Spellbomb can dig you toward your other threats as well. So that's a big difference, and it's something that I'm closer to liking than I was in the past, but I'm still not quite there in terms of playing Kalitas number 2. Now, Maxime is on the 4-1 Liliana split in the main deck, 4 Veil, 1 Last Hope. That's where I'm at now as well. I'm a big fan of that. Ever since I added the 4th Liliana of the Veil, I have no regrets. She has been stunningly effective overall. Obviously, she's not great in every matchup, but I have not regretted adding the 4th Liliana whatsoever. Maxime is on the 1-3-1 split with Decay to Trophy to Pulse, and I love that. I have always advocated for that, or I say always, for a very long time I've been advocating for that. Nothing has changed. I still like that a lot. 1 main deck Collective Brutality, 4 Fatal Push, 3-3 Inquisition Thoughtseize split. This spread of non-creature spells is exactly what I'm playing, and I, of course, approve. So moving on to Maxime's sideboard, he managed to keep 3 Brutalities in the 75, which is something that I don't currently have. Bad timing for me to have made that change right before Burn took off. I've thought about making an emergency change to my list for the next league I'm going to play, which, by the way, I'm probably gonna start and maybe even finish tomorrow. Don't know if I'll end up doing that, but I do like seeing all 3 Brutality in the 75 right now for that reason. Maxime is also still on Choke, whereas we cut it from our list here on this channel with this month's update. You can watch my deck tech update my most recent one for my thoughts on that. Choke is still very reasonable, of course, but I personally have moved away from it. Maxime is only on 2 Fulminator Mage, and that was a big decision point for me. I personally, very, very close, and it's not obviously an apples-to-apples comparison in some ways, but I personally like the 3rd Fulminator before I like the 1st Choke. But to each his own, and obviously he did extraordinarily well with this, so we're seeing a Damnation and a Languish. I kind of envy him the ability to squeeze in 2 4-mana sweepers. I've never quite managed to do that. We've got the 1 of Kitchen Finks, which I love. Grafdigger's Cage is in my board too, I like it. But Damping Sphere is a card I am not particularly high on, and never, to be honest, really have been in this deck. Now, having said that, I think Damping Sphere as an exact 1 of is really, really reasonable. I've never really gone so far as to think it should make my personal 15, but I really don't mind seeing this as a 1 of whatsoever. It's when you start to see 2-3 Damping Spheres that I would really advise paring those down. I think a 1 of, totally fine. Not for me, but totally fine. He's got the 1 Nile Spellbomb, the 2 Surgical Extraction. This is a fine split. You guys know I rate Nile Spellbomb pretty highly. I would rather have two or three access to two or three in my 75 rather than just one. But this is reasonable, nothing unreasonable about this. And then of course we have the one of Nissa. So I really like a whole lot of what Maxime is doing. A lot of what he's doing is either the same as what I'm doing, or it's very similar. Like the stuff that I don't currently have, like Choke and Damping Sphere, I think they're perfectly fine as one-ofs. Things like this. I don't currently have the two Kalidas, but I see why it's well positioned right now. So that's my analysis. That's my thought on. Those are my thoughts on Maxime's list. So well done and congratulations, Maxime. You did us proud. You did us proud. Well done on making the top 8. So we see a Whir Prison deck. We'll briefly touch on the other decks as we're scrolling toward the other rock deck. I am no expert on what usually goes in these decks, but do note that if you're facing them, Spellskite can come in against you to redirect some of the removal, some of the green-black utility removal. We've got some Planeswalkers, both versions of Tezzeret that can make an appearance, and of course Psymaster Thopterus, alternative win condition, and definitely a good value piece in his own right. Perhaps also Sorceress Spyglass, naming Liliana of the Veil. So be aware of all that. And like I said, I don't exactly know if there's anything too crazy in that list that stands out, but I do know that this list has definitely picked up a lot of steam in the wake of KCI's banning. We see our old nemesis Dredge up here with a one of main deck Dark Blast, just like the one that got us in the most recent league. And otherwise looks like a fairly typical Dredge list to me. This Assassin's Trophy is seeming to be a fixture as a one or two of in a lot of successful lists. So watch out for that. Watch out for Lightning Axes as removal. And yeah, you guys know how Dredge goes. We don't ever really want to see it, but we can beat it if we do. So next up we have Lucas. Lucas is our other representative for Golgari who's made the top 8, so congratulations, Lucas. Well done, my friend. And let's take a look at your list. So here we have an almost identical land base to what Maxime played, except Lucas is including a Twilight Mire in place of a Hissing Quagmire. So you'll note that Lucas has reduced his overall threat count by 1. Now you might say Hissing Quagmire, it's just a 2/2, it's not much of a threat. But, you know, I'm telling you guys, I think this land is just a tad underrated. Now, it's no Treetop Village in terms of closing out the game, and it's less overtly impressive than other BGX manlands like Raging Ravine, perhaps even Shambling Vent. But, you know, this has actually been very, very relevant, this Death Touch, against Eldrazi decks. Even in the mirror, if you have to kill other things and leave Tarmogoyfs around, situations like this, don't discount the Quagmire and what it brings to the table. So I made my point about Maxime playing 4 Field of Ruin and going down to 16 black sources to do so. Lucas has made the same decision, and on top of that, Lucas has lost a threat from his land base and is playing a Twilight Mire as a way to kind of try to make up for it. So Lucas is a little more likely to be able to cast his stuff on curve than Maxime, but has a little bit lower threat density overall. Either way, the bigger concern is the only 16 black sources, the 4 Fields of Ruin. But if anything, guys, this just goes to show you, Field of Ruin, such a powerful card in the deck. Now, in my opinion, 3 is still the optimal number because it gives you the most balanced overall land base. But when people say, why would you play Green-Black Rock? Why would you play Golgari? Isn't splashing a color better? The main answer that people give them is, well, the mana base in Green-Black Rock is a lot better. And then the typical response is, well, that's true, but is that really worth giving up, like, Stony Silence, Lingering Souls, Path to Exile, or Bloodbraid Elf, Kolagan's Command, Grim Lavamancer, Lightning Bolt, etc., etc.? And the answer, in my opinion, is yes. And it's partially because Field of Ruin is such an amazing card. So, like I said, 4 Field, I would classify that as slightly greedy, but if you're going to be greedy, I guess you might as well be greedy to play one of the best attractions to straight up Golgari, which is the Field of Ruin. So moving on to the creature suite, Lucas has opted for a 4-2 split of Confidant and Tracker rather than the 3-3 that I have been on. And you know, Dark Confidant, still one of the best things you can be doing on turn 2 in Modern. I've been bob-pilled. I've taken the bob pill. I realize now the error of my ways. I have nothing against the Tasigur build. I think all of the arguments about why Tasigur is a valid option are still true. But with Modern as linear as it is, getting that turn 2 Dark Confidant down and just digging you so deep, looking for your hate cards, looking for your interaction, all while clocking for 2 a turn. This guy's awesome, so I get wanting to play 4. I myself have carefully considered that, but I really don't want to lose my 3rd Tireless Tracker. I think if I ever play the 4th Dark Confidant, I'm going to try to keep 3 Tracker in the deck, and that's going to require some rejigging of other things. So for now, I have chosen to stay on the 3-3, but I totally like the 4-2 as well. And once again, we see the double main deck Kalitas. So at this point, the arguments that I just made for it are becoming even more relevant due to the strong results that we're seeing. A lot of the recent 5-0 lists across various weeks have also played the double main deck Kalitas. So definitely keep that in mind, guys, when you're designing your own lists. This is starting to be a proven successful choice. Moving on, we have only 4 Lilianas in the main deck overall, and we don't have any Lilianas in the side, so this is a very Liliana light list by the standards of Golgari. We have 3 Veil and 1 Last Hope, and I've got to tell you, I personally like having 6 Lilianas in my deck. I've got 4 Veil, 1 Last Hope main, and the 2nd Last Hope in the side, and I don't think they've ever really steered me wrong, so I understand that their slots are limited. There's a lot of really other great things to do, but the leaving a little bit of equity on the table, in my opinion, by only playing 4 total 3-mana Lilianas in a deck like this. So, moving on, we have 4 Inquisition of Kozilek and 3 Thoughtseize, so we see that Lucas has opted for 7 1-mana discard effects in the main deck, which is part of why he didn't have room for any more Lilianas. Now, this is a very, very interesting decision, and it might seem like we're talking about some really minor things, guys, but that's what it's all about. That's what this deep analysis is about. So why would we want 7 1-mana discard spells? Well, basically, I understand the theory behind it, right? The theory is that we are, that is the form of interaction that is more or less unique to a deck like ours in the Modern format. You know, Fatal Push is a great card, but it's not like other colors and other archetypes don't have kill spells. Fatal Push just happens to be the best one overall that we have. But no other decks are really playing Inquisition of Kozilek and Thoughtseize, especially in the main deck, especially in these types of numbers, besides black-based mid-range decks like BGX and Shadow. And of course, kind of all-in discard decks like 8-Rack, right? So, I think if I had to guess as to Lucas's mindset here, it might have been, well, these discard effects are kind of our bread and butter. They're kind of what we live and die by. I think including a 7th one is where I want to be. And I really see the logic behind that. But I'll come back to it in a second. I want to also mention we only have 3 Fatal Push in this list. We have 4 Assassin's Trophy, 1 Maelstrom Pulse, 2 Collective Brutality, rounding out the non-creature spells. And there's a lot here that's interesting. So double main deck Collective Brutality is something I've done in the past, and I've never had any issues with it, and now's a fine time to be doing it with Burn Everywhere. So, fair enough. But we're leaving a lot on the table to do this double Brutality. We've got, again, only 4 total Lilianas, and perhaps even more importantly, we have only 3 Fatal Pushes. Now, almost every successful Golgari list is rocking the full 4 Fatal Push. I understand the temptation to cut to 3, because it is dead in some matchups, and it is underwhelming in other matchups, and it is a little limited sometimes. Even when it's good, it can be tricky to come by a Revolt sometimes. I understand all of that. I still think it is pretty much nailed on correct to play 4 Fatal Push until we get another form of removal added to our playable pool. Then maybe we'll look at cutting to 3. But in my opinion, you just want 4 Fatal Push in this meta. It's a creature meta. It's an aggro meta. It still really is. And especially with double Kalitas main deck, we're trying to get all the kill spells we can, right? And all the most efficient ones. Fatal Push is our most efficient one, in my opinion. So I don't necessarily agree with that. And like I said, I think 2 Collective Brutality, it's perfectly fine. But remember that it's also a discard effect. So I think we might be a tad heavy on the discard effects relative to the norm when you combine the inclusion of 2 Brutality with the inclusion of 7 1-mana discard spells. So I'm not necessarily the biggest fan of either of those decisions. I understand why they were made, but putting it all together, I'm not sure I'm the biggest fan. Then again, you could make the counterpoint and you could say that double Collective Brutality, the second copy, helps cover for the deficiency of missing the 4th Fatal Push because the -2/-2 mode will kill a lot of the things that push kills. And that's true, but a lot is not all, not even really that close to all. Plus, we're at a 2-mana sorcery speed relative to a 1-mana instant, right? So, I'm not necessarily fully on board with what he's done, and of course I wouldn't be, because I'm fully on board with what I'm doing. That's why I'm playing it, right? That's why we all have our own lists that we have settled on if we've taken the time to finely tune them. But those are my objections here. Also, you see the 4 Assassin's Trophies in no Abrupt Decay. I like the 3-1 split better. I like the 3-1 split better. I just do. I think Abrupt Decay is still very well positioned, actually. And trophy, I think 3 trophies are sufficient, especially in a 4 Field of Ruin list. So, Lucas, if you happen to watch this is not a criticism, buddy. You did excellently, and this is very, very minor decision points we're talking about. But since we're all invested and committed players, that's exactly what we're here to do, right? So if you, or Maxime for that matter, if any of you guys watch this, I would love to hear your feedback. Anyway, moving on, we see 2 Collective Brutality in the sideboard, which, combined with the 2 in the main, yeah, that's right, that's a full playset. And guess what? That's doable in the current meta with Burn Everywhere, with it being such a good flexible card. It feels kind of weird to say this, because I only have 2 in my current list, but I think 4 is perfectly reasonable. Now, here we come to a choice that kind of exacerbates everything I just said. We have Duress. Now, Duress is a fine card. I think it's very, very playable. I've played it myself in the past. But we are now loaded down with discard effects. We've got 8 total 1-mana discard effects, and we've got 4 Collective Brutalities on top of that. So, in my opinion, this Duress is surplus to requirements, or maybe a main deck Inquisition is surplus to requirements, or maybe a Collective Brutality, or maybe 2 of those 3 things are surplus to requirements. I think, again, we're leaving a little bit of equity on the table, and we're getting a little bit worse at our top decks if we play this many discard effects. Again, none of them, I don't disagree with any of them in a vacuum, but taken all together, I could see paring down on that to make room for a couple other things. We have Engineered Explosives, big fan, and we have a full 4 Fulminator Mage. Now, I love this. I have tried in the past to squeeze the 4th in myself. Big fan of this 4 Fulminator Mage. I don't personally do it, I need that slot for other things, but no arguments from me here. This guy is awesome. This guy is great. And, 4 Fulminator plus 4 Field of Ruin. Again, this is something that might be a little overkill with 4 Trophy as well, if you ask me. I think if you just added a 17th Black Source, personally, keep the 4 Fulminator, maybe even keep the 4 Trophy. That's probably the first change I would make if we're looking at those 3 choices and how they all interact together. That said, in general, 4 Fulminator, love it. Very, very cool. Feels great to board all those in. We've got 2 copies of Languish. Totally fine, totally fine. For me, if I am making room for 2 4-mana Wraths, I prefer the Languish and Damnation split, because there are matchups where you want one and not the other. I think I think I prefer Maxime Split here, but Languish, of course, is a card that is potentially an even bigger blowout, right? Because if your stuff lives and you sweep up a wide board, oh my god, that's just one of the best feelings in this deck, so I get it. I get it. And here my man Lucas has double Nile Spellbomb, big fan of that, very happy to see that, and 2 Surgical Extraction as well. So he's well equipped to interact with graveyards between those 2 things, and the Kalidases and the Scoozes. So very, very cool. And of course, just like Lucas, just like Maxime, just like myself, is still playing the one of Nissa, who is a game winner. Wouldn't recommend going away from her, even though I've been tempted myself. She's a 5 mana, clunker. She just wins games single-handedly. I think we want exactly one of her, and Lucas and Maxime both agree. So to you, Lucas, great job, buddy. Well done. Thanks for representing our archetype at the very top tables of GP Toronto. Moving on, we have a Grixis Shadow deck, which I believe won it, but don't quote me on that. I think I read that they won it. And we see some fairly typical stuff here as far as I can tell, but Shattering Blow, that's a new one to me. Exile target artifact, I haven't really seen that before, but otherwise, if you are a Patreon supporter, you've read my most recent scouting report, Grixis Shadow was the subject of it, and we are seeing here a lot of the stuff that we discussed. So, definitely something to keep an eye on. Next up, Izzet Phoenix was also in the top 8, and Izzet Phoenix did very, very well overall, putting, I think, 2 into the top 8, and then another handful of decks in the top 32. Probably had the highest presence of all in the top 32. And from here on out, we've covered the BGX stuff. I'm just going to do some quick rundowns of the rest of it. Note the 2 Blood Moon. We're going to look at all the numbers of Blood Moons and all the Phoenix decks. I think 2 is pretty stock at this point. Definitely something to be wary of when we are playing against Phoenix post-side. And you know what, guys? Phoenix is such a good deck because it's very consistent, it's very resilient, and it has a variety of angles from which it attacks. Many decks that can handle the Phoenixes or don't care that much about the Phoenixes will struggle against Thing in the Ice and vice versa. So consider Blood Moon just another angle of attack. That's something to watch out for. Otherwise, they've got a lot of 1 and 2-ofs, a lot of interaction in the side. And this Pyromancer Ascension is another thing that's starting to get more popular from what I can tell. So watch out for that as well. Also might be worth keeping an eye on the number of gut shots, because the presence of gut shot is what makes Dark Confidant really bad in this matchup. But if gut shot falls out of favor, then Confidant might be not as bad, worth maybe keeping a copy or 2 in instead of cutting altogether post-side. So we've got a couple gut shot and, lots of other stuff. So right away we have another Phoenix deck to look at. Well, here's a couple Blood Moons, just like we said. Surgical, Young Pyromancer as a value piece in the side, another one to watch out for. And the Pteramander. Pteramander's in a fair amount of these lists. Pteramander has gotten us on the channel before. Feels bad to get beat by the Salamander thing, but it happens. And there's another 2 gut shots, so maybe that's becoming the thing to do here. So then we have our old Nemesis Titan Shift, one of our worst matchups, and we do see that's unfortunately for us still around at the top tables as well. And perhaps even this deck was a little bit more hateful to us specifically than it would usually be. We see a couple copies of Flame Slash in the main deck. We see some value in the form of Courser of Kruphix, a kind of a grindy value card that also, of course, helps advance their main win condition. And then we see the usual 3 Obstinate Baloth in the side, very, very annoying card against us, especially in conjunction with Summoner's Pact. And a couple Tireless Trackers, some Relics, some things that are decent against us. But yeah, so unfortunately for us, Titan Shift is still kicking around, but that's alright. That's alright. So let's do a quick rundown of these other decks. They're 9 through 32. It was I was inspired to do this, and most of this is going to be just my first initial reaction, because I just glanced through the lists that made it without really looking at them, just seeing what archetypes made it, and I was like, wow, pretty cool top 32. Lots of... Perhaps we could say that so far the KCI ban is working as intended. That might be the takeaway, but either way, great to see our favorite deck get 2 copies in the top 8, and then a really cool rest of the field as well. So we've got a humans deck. That's to be expected. We see this the new toy Deputy of Detention picking up some steam, even though it's not a human. Definitely a big fan of this card. I would probably be playing it right now in some number. 2 seems correct to me. If I was on a deck like humans or spirits. We see Militia Bugler and Dismember as some cards that could come in against us. Maybe Sin Collector as well. People like to bring in Auric Champion against us. It's not as good as they think it is, but it still probably could come in. Do note the spice here. Tajic. 2 copies of Tajic, if that's how you pronounce it. The Legion's Edge. A guy with a whole bunch of text, a relatively new tech. And yeah, pretty cool one. So he is starting to see play. I see him more in sideboards than in main decks, but apparently he's main deckable. This list came in 9th. So we've got yet more Phoenix decks, again with the 2 Blood Moon. So heads up for that. And again with the 2 Gut Shot. So as of right now, maybe those are the numbers we should expect. 2 cards that we need to think about, Gut Shot and Blood Moon. And otherwise, you just need to think about seeing Phoenix in general, because it is everywhere. And we've got another Phoenix deck with another 2 Blood Moon, and this one has 3 Gut Shot. Also, again, Flame Slash is starting to creep into a variety of decks as a 1-of or a 2-of. This one's got a few different 1-ofs. We see a split between Crackling Drake and Young Pyromancer as the value pieces, a couple Terramanders. So, the Panoptic Mirror here, I have to assume that's a typo, perhaps a typo for Opt. And I don't see Opt anywhere there. Panoptic Mirror in Izzet Phoenix would be a little bit crazy, but don't forget this card's name, because we're going to actually... I did look at one list really closely, and I know it's actually in there, and it's not a mistake. At least I don't think it's a mistake, so very, very cool. But we'll get to that in a minute. Next up, we have Ad Nauseam. I think there were 3 Ad Nauseam decks here, and I love that, because Ad Nauseam is a deck that I used to play. Huge fan of Ad Nauseam. It's a very cool combo deck, in my opinion. The theme behind it is cool. The mechanics of drawing your entire deck are cool. The subtly huge importance of your scries in a deck that does not shuffle, and that's basically just trying to set up the same combo most games. Very, very cool. Does a lot of really unique stuff. I like the aesthetics of the deck. I like the way the deck plays. So I'm very happy to see Ad Nauseam put up results. And I'm also selfishly happy to see it because it's a good matchup for us, right? So... this main deck is actually exactly what I was playing when I was on Ad Nauseam. This exact 60, except I only played 2 basic lands. I probably had another Temple in there. In the sideboard, we see a pretty standard list with a variety of things. Variety of removals and sweepers, and you've got, of course, the ley lines. We always need to prepare for a ley line against Ad Nauseam. Assume that will be in. This is fine for us because we want to bring in everything like extra Maelstrom Pulses, for example, everything that destroys non-creature permanents anyway, because we want to hit their Phyrexian on life. We want to sometimes hit their Mana Rocks. We want to be able to have answers to random giant value creatures they bring in from the side. So we will come loaded down for Ley Lines of Sanctity, but just keep in mind the potential for Ley Line when you're evaluating your keeps post side. Anyway, this is a pretty standard Ad Nauseam list, including the sideboard, with the exception of something that I never really played and never saw that much, Vendilion Clique. This is a heavy on the hand disruption Ad Naus list, and I don't hate that at all. I was a big fan of Thoughtseize in Ad Nauseam when I played it. Vendilion Clique is just another way to do that, and it serves as an alternate win condition. That's a surprisingly quick clock once it gets going, so I'm all about that. Good job, Ad Naus players. We see more Jeskai control. Let's take a quick look at this. Lots of the usual stuff, but the thing that really immediately jumps out to me that's relevant to us is actually these first 3 cards right here. So number 1, Lightning Helix as a 4-of and Lightning Bolt as a 2-of. My understanding is that in the past, these numbers were more likely to be reversed. Bolt is just more efficient, especially in a 4 Snapcaster deck. But now, of course, the rise of Burn, the high meta share of Burn means that Lightning Helix is a card that is kind of supplanting Lightning Bolt as a premier form of burn/interaction. So definitely something to keep in mind for us. And then, of course, the one of Spell Snare. This might be a nod to our deck more than almost anything else. We've got a lot of high-value 2-drops that they want to counter. So definitely be prepared for Spell Snare. Keep that in mind. Otherwise, we see these Angels are decent against us. There's a lot of stuff they can do. Nothing else too much stands out. Porphyry Nodes is pretty spicy, but yeah. I think the big takeaway from this Jeskai list is to watch out for more Lightning Helixes and fewer Lightning Bolts than you're perhaps used to seeing out of a Jeskai deck. Hardened Scales, no surprise that this deck is putting up some decent results. It's very powerful, and it's one deck that a lot of people will be pivoting to in the wake of KCI's ban. They will gotta put their Mox Opal somewhere, right? So here it is. Some of them will be playing Hardened Scales, and we see Karn Scion of Urza. I think this card's very cool. That's a good grindy value card that should come in against us, and maybe Dismembers as well. That's about all I see. Otherwise, pretty standard list putting up the results. Let's take a quick look at this Jund list. So Jund making an appearance in the top 32, getting outshone by our Golgari deck, by our take on BGX, but still Jund getting a result in there. We see only 3 Bloodbright Elf. That might be, that might be more or less what you could expect out of the average Jund deck. We are seeing, otherwise, a lot of the same kind of stuff. We're seeing some nods to burn with these Collective Brutalities and Kitchen Finks, and we are seeing otherwise a sideboard that mirrors in some ways the ones that we analyzed that are green-black rock, like with a 1 of Choke, a 1 of Sphere, the 1 Spellbomb, 2 Extraction split. We saw a lot of similar things in specifically Maxime's list, so it's no surprise to see the Jund player doing the same thing here, and perhaps that is an endorsement of the type of decisions Maxime was making, to see a lot of similar decisions having success in the Jund shell. So yeah, Jund is still our close cousin, our friend, so good job. We like to see Jund doing well. We've got a Spirits list here, and no surprise, Spirits is still a strong deck that they got a result here. The 1 of Rattlechains, I love this card. It does not see enough play in my opinion, and it's very good against us, so respect that, Rattlechains. They are still on 4 copies of Reflector Mage with no Deputy of Detention, and I know Deputy is starting to compete for that kind of interaction on a stick slot with a Reflector, so interesting to see the full 4 Reflector and no Deputy in the 75, but hey, it's not clear which one is better in my opinion. Pros and cons to both. Reflector is still a huge one for us to watch out for. Remember that these decks are usually playing Rest in Peace, so be aware of that. If you're leaning heavily on Tarmogoyf, for example, that the RIP could come down. Otherwise, it's a lot of the same stuff we are used to seeing out of the Spirits deck. Yet another Phoenix deck with yet another double Blood Moon in the side, and yet another double Gut Shot main. So again, that's the big thing I'm trying to look at with these lists. Here's some spice, a little Rest for the Weary. Look how much people are teching toward burn. Here's a great example, a Rest for the Weary. We saw a lot of Dragon's Claws too in the other Izzet decks, but this player is splashing white for Rest for the Weary. Very, very cool. And yeah, otherwise a lot of the same stuff from my quick glance here. We see another Hardened Scales list, and we see some spicy lands that are not necessarily always there, just kind of cool to make note of. Phyrexia's Core is a way to cash in artifacts to gain life, and Ruins of Oran-Reef is a way to pump creatures. It's yet another mana sink along the lines of cards like Animation Module. So, pretty cool stuff, and here we see more or less the same type of cards. Dismember and Karn Scion of Urza are the major ones to worry about, them bringing in against us post-side. So, again, pretty standard stuff. A main deck Spellskite is actually something to take note of as well. Not something that's stock per se, but something that can be good against us. We see Lantern Control making also a bit of a comeback in the wake of KCI's banning, partially because people need their artifact fix, and partially because my understanding is that KCI beat up on Lantern very badly. So, anyway, Lantern is back in the meta to some degree. You know, Mastermind's Acquisition, that's definitely a card I'm not used to seeing there, but it's definitely a cool tutor effect. And otherwise, we're seeing some main deck surgical extractions, some thought seizes. This is not on Whir of Invention. This is actually more like how the Lantern lists used to look before Whir of Invention was printed. So that's pretty interesting. And here is the 200 IQ play. This is the 200 IQ inclusion. Circle of Protection Red. You want to talk about teching against Burn, teching against Phoenix, teching against Modern in general, which is basically Red Cards the Gathering, let's be honest. Red is everywhere. It is the most seen color in Modern, and Circle of Protection Red is a pretty spicy way to get that done. Obviously, that doesn't come into play against us. I just thought it was so cool that I had to point it out. But, you know, we might be seeing some Planeswalkers out of Lantern Control sideboards against us, some Welding Jars to protect their pieces, some Spell Skites for the same reason, Spyglass for our Liliana. That's maybe it. I don't know if, depends what they have to bring out, but maybe stuff like Pulse and Trophy comes in. Hard to say, but definitely that other stuff are things to watch out for. But I don't mind our Lantern matchup. I think our Lantern matchup is pretty good, just like it is against most decks that deploy a lot of non-creature permanents. We are one of the best decks in Modern in terms of answering those. So for all the talk about Burn, for all the tech that people have against Burn that we've witnessed here, here's the first Burn list that's shown up. And it's actually a good old-fashioned Boros list with Skewer the Critics is, of course, a great addition, but this is not playing Light Up the Stage. It's just playing kind of the old-fashioned lists, but with Skullcrack mostly moved to the side to make way for Skewer the Critics. You know, if these are how the Burn lists are looking, I think we're still fine against them. I think we're still totally fine against them. Not that much that's a huge hoser against us out of the side, but some things you could expect to see. Deflecting Palm is definitely one to watch out for. It's a high variance card. Sometimes it's kind of going to rot in their hand until we take it with discard. Sometimes it's going to really get us. Definitely just keep that one in mind. EE might come in to clean up our 2-drops. Ensnaring Bridge, I don't think they should bring in against us, but they might. Some people will. I don't think it's great, but it's definitely something I've seen too many times to discount as a possibility. Relics, of course, people will consider bringing in. And then we have Risk Factor, which is, in a way, it's kind of a grindy value burn card, so expect to see that these days as well. And moving on to Green-White Tron. Now, this is a little spicy. The only white lands are Horizon Canopies, but of course, that's a very powerful land. Sometimes Tron wants to cash in their lands for action if they've assembled Tron, but they have no payoff. Horizon Canopy is obviously a fantastic way to do that. Now, why are they splashing white? Well, once again, we see Burn warping the meta to a small degree, or perhaps a not so small degree, with a main deck, timely reinforcements out of Tron, very spicy, and then of course another timely in the side, also a couple Rest in Peace, something to consider that we don't usually expect out of Tron, but worth of taking note here, and Path to Exile as well. I imagine that all 6 of these white cards are playable against us. Now, they'll usually bring in cards like Thragtusk as well, perhaps Thought-Knot Seerso. How many slots they really have to bring all this stuff in that's playable against us, I don't know, but all kinds of crazy stuff happening in Modern right now, guys, so be aware of stuff like that. Pretty cool white splash in the Tron list, I must say. Then we have Abs and Company, and here we see a lot of the stuff you expect. You've got Duskwatch Recruiter to dig, you've got the Vizier combo, you've got Walking Ballista as a win condition, Ronus as an alternative win con, all that stuff we're used to seeing. But then we have a couple Eternal Witness, which is not that unusual, but, you know, definitely worth noting. Good value piece. 4 main deck Kitchen Finks. This is also some anti-burn tech, but can also be really tough value for us to fight through, clogging up the ground, buying them a lot of time to assemble their combo through our interaction. Then we have a really cool piece of tech, Liliana Heretical Healer. She's a 2/3 lifelinker that transforms and makes a zombie when another creature her controller controls dies. And then from there, she can start buying back creatures from the graveyard. So she is kind of an interesting value piece in the sense that, like, she gets value out of removal in more ways than one. When removal happens, she's going to flip, she's going to make a chump blocking zombie, and then she's going to be able to buy back the most relevant pieces of the combo. Or just buy back Eternal Witness, which can buy back a Collected Company, things like that. And I guess she's kind of an alternative win condition as well. Or a little bit of interaction with the +2, but I don't think that's as much why she's there. Definitely one to watch out for, though. Another one to watch out for is Postmortem Lunge, which is starting to become more common in these decks. Again, it's just a way for them to fight through interaction by way of recursion from the graveyard, which is very, very relevant in terms of what our interaction does. So be wary of those cards. And then you want to talk about a toolbox sideboard. There's literally 15 one-ofs in this deck, and it's everything from Tidehollow Sculler to Worship to Orzhov Pontiff to Elspeth Sun's Champion to one-of Leylines. This is, we expect to see a toolbox out of this deck, but this is taking toolboxing to the next level, and it's pretty cool. I do like it. I do like it. So, again, I was just kind of excited by this entire top 32. Really made me happy about Modern. Really made me happy about the state of Modern. Let me know what you guys think. Maybe a few too many Izzet Phoenix decks for my taste, though, as we come to yet another one, and once again we have double Blood Moon, and once again we have double Gutshot. So, a couple Terramanders here, a lot of the other stuff that we're used to seeing. Izzet Charm seems to be becoming stock as a one-of. All good things to know about. We see yet another Ad Nauseam deck, which, as I said before, makes me happy. This one is a little bit more different than what I'm used to seeing in terms of specifically this choice. We've got triple Inferno Titan in the sideboard. Now, Ad Nauseam playing a couple, 2-3 big goons out of the side as an alternative win condition. That's nothing new. Inferno Titan, however, specifically is new to me. I personally played Grave Titan. Now, you can play Dragonlord Dromoka, you can play a whole entire Gifts Ungiven on Burial Rites package with Iona and whatever else you feel like playing. I personally really like the Grave Titan. I don't really see why Inferno Titan is better, to be honest. Obviously, it has different upsides, it does different things, but I think Grave Titan coming down and making a couple zombies and then making a couple more zombies every time it attacks, that does both. That ends the game and clogs up the ground. And, Inferno Titan obviously can do similar things, but this fire-breathing effect, Ad Nauseam can't make that much red mana repeatedly. It can make the red mana it needs to go off and cast Lightning Storm with consistency, but sinking red mana over a few turns into Inferno Titan, you're not really maximizing the cards, so I'm not as much a fan of this as I am of Grave Titan, but maybe that's just because I'm biased in favor of black and not so much of red. So, pretty spicy to see nevertheless. Pretty pumped to see Ad Nauseam doing well nevertheless. We see some really cool cards like Bosieju, who shelters all. But yeah, nothing too crazy against us, except, if they do have any kind of big creature out of the side, any kind of alternative win con, you should 100% expect to see it against you if you're on Golgari. So we see yet another Dredge deck, and we see that one of main deck Dark Blast. That got us. We see anything else that's spicy? Here's something that's spicy. Stain the Mind. I used to play this card in my green-black Elves sideboard, and it's just a really cool combo hate that can be cast, on turn 3 with consistency in decks like Dredge and Elves, sometimes even on turn 2. Maybe not so much in Elves. You'd have to have an absolute insane nut draw to cast this on turn 2. And even then, I don't know if you'd have black mana by the time it was all said and done. You just might have a lot of green. But anyway, if these decks go off, you can turn 2 occasionally. Turn 3 with relative consistency, cast a Stain the Mind. It's basically an extraction effect that does not actually need the target to be in the graveyard first. So pretty cool for those go-wide decks. I do like this. Not relevant against us, but something I thought was cool to point out. Against us, they've got Lightning Axes, they've got Trophies, they've got EE. They've just got a lot of removal that's going to come in. They're going to try to still mostly focus on going off and fighting through our hate, but sometimes our hate is in the form of a creature like Skooz or Kalitas. So if they can bring in these pieces that either kill our hate or kill our clock, like Tarmogoyf, they probably will. Then we have one of the biggest reasons I was excited. We have a Taking Turns list. We actually have 2 Taking Turns lists that made the top 32, but this is the first one. I have Taking Turns videos on this channel. Some of my newer subscribers might not know this. You can search them. When I started this channel, I was actually making turns videos in deck techs at roughly the same rate as I was making Golgari stuff, but I eventually decided I had to focus on the one true path. The Golgari stuff, it's just what I'm doing. It's just all I do now in Modern is play green-black mid-range. However, Taking Turns was my most recent second deck, my most recent sidekick, and I still have a soft spot for it. I still root for it. So here we see an Izzet Turns deck, and we see a very light black splash, which as far as I can tell is basically just for potentially setting EE to 3 and maybe casting your Surgicals, without having to pay the life if you were able to get this Watery Grave on an end step and then cast your Surgical sometime later in the game. So, but basically in Izzet Turns list, we're seeing a lot of the... We see the main deck EE, which is interesting, not something that's common, but something that might be good right now. Otherwise, a more or less stock Izzet Turns list as far as I can tell. Definitely don't disagree with much of what's going on here. I think it looks like a really balanced, really well-designed list. So, well done to you, Matthew, for putting up the big result with Taking Turns. We see another Humans list here. Here we see Deputy of Detention once again making an appearance. Once again, we see cards like Auric Champion that we need to watch out for. Dismember will probably come in against us, or at least it could potentially, depending on how many other cards. Kambal is reasonable against us. Sin Collector as well. Here we see some main deck Militia Buglers, which is not what we want to see out of Humans, but it is still somewhat common. So, yep, Humans still around, still getting it done. Here's our third Ad Nauseam list. We love to see it. Nephalia Academy is a piece of tech that we need to know about. This is a colorless land that reads, if a spell or ability an opponent controls causes you to discard a card, you may reveal that card, put it on top of your library instead of putting it anywhere else. Obviously, this is designed to mitigate the effects of discard-heavy, black-based mid-range decks like ours. So, Nephalia Academy, definitely one to watch out for, definitely one to have in the back of your mind so you are not blindsided by it if you run into it in an Ad Nauseam deck, or indeed in a Taking Turns deck. I have seen, this would mostly be just for a mono blue turns list, but I've seen Nephalia Academy played there too. So anyway, definitely a spicy one, definitely one to watch out for. Another piece of spice here is main deck 2 copies of Solemnity, which combos with Phyrexian Unlife, which is in turn a part of the core Ad Nauseam combo, but here's a secondary combo, a secondary win condition basically. Solemnity combines with Phyrexian Unlife to basically make you immortal. You don't lose the game for having 0 or less life, instead you take poison counters. Damage is dealt to you as though its source had infect. Solemnity means players can't get counters, so trying to kill a player with both of this stuff out, not going to happen through your usual means. So, something to be aware of. We also have very spicy 2 of Grand Abolisher in the side. I love the spice in this list. Not the most relevant against a deck like ours, but something that is cool enough to mention. So, Ad Nauseam getting it done in the wake of KCI's ban. Here we come to our second burn list, and once again, it doesn't have that much new spice. It's not Rakdos with Bump in the Night, taking advantage of the low CMC newer builds that Skewer the Critics helped enable. We do have Skewer the Critics, we do have a Spectacle card, but once again, there's no Light Up the Stage. So a little while ago I said Skewer the Critics is for sure going to be making all these burn lists. Light Up the Stage, jury is still out. Very high potential, very interesting and reasonable card, but whether it will make the final cuts after the dust settles, I don't know. So far, that prediction is kind of being borne out. We see that Skewer is a card you should expect to see 4 of, and Light Up the Stage, maybe, maybe not. Who knows? But once again, we have kind of a traditional Boros list. This one of also shunting Skullcracks mostly to the side in order to make room for the new tech. And here we have, Paths to Exile, Rest in Peace. These are the types of things that will probably come in against us. Not much else. Maybe Searing Blood, depending on what they saw out of us game 1. Anyway, Burn. Burn is still Burn, and I think we're still good against it if it's just a Boros list with Skewer the Critics. I think the Rakdos lists might be a little better against us, but it's hard to say. That flashback bump in the night, it can get us. It can get us. The games go on long enough. So here we come to our second Taking Turns list. Daniel Wong, my main man Daniel, sneaking in at the 31st spot. Great job, Daniel. Daniel makes amazing Taking Turns content. You guys should check it out. I have to give myself a little bit of a shout out when I give Daniel a shout out, because he told me that my Turns content inspired him to create his channel. Now maybe that inspiration was in the form of him saying, well, I'm a better Turns player than this Grimflayer dude. Why don't I make some videos? Which I'm not putting those words into Daniel's mouth at all. That was just a joke, but he is a better Turns player than me, make no mistake. He is very, very enlightening. Even if you don't like the deck, you might like his videos. So check out Daniel Wong's channel, and yeah, he's putting his expertise into practice here at GP Toronto, and we see an even spicier Taking Turns list than the other one, in my opinion, because we've got the main deck Commandeer that I love, and we've got another one on the side. That's the first thing to note. We have a Panoptic Mirror. Now, that was definitely a typo when it was included in the Is It Phoenix list, but here, I think it might actually be here. You know, this could still be an opt, I guess. But I think this Panoptic Mirror is actually supposed to be here. Maybe I should go read what Daniel wrote up about this list, or to see if this is true or not. But this looks like a playable card in Taking Turns. It's a 5-mana imprint artifact, and once you imprint whatever, you can keep casting it repeatedly during your upkeep. Obviously, seems like it has some synergy with the idea of taking all the extra turns. So, big if true, very, very spicy. And we see some other unusual cards like a One of Snapback, which Daniel has been known to play in the past, but definitely still cool to see that around. And we see a One of Gelectrode in the side. We see all kinds of cool value One-ofs in the side. We see Crackling Drake. We see a lot of interaction. We see the triple thing in the ice, which is what I did when I was on turns, but this One of Gelectrode is totally mind-blowingly cool. Big fan of that, and great work, Daniel. So down to the final, the bottom tier, the barely in the top 32 is good old-fashioned Green Tron. Still a deck that's putting up results in the meta, still one that we need to be wary of, and not exactly pleased to see, but I'll tell you guys, the Tron matchup is so much better now with Assassin's Trophy. Feels very, very, very winnable to me. And but yeah, it's still Tron. It's still going to Tron you out. It's still very... has the inevitability and the consistency, and you still really need to clock them before they just make their land drops and kill you by hard casting things. I don't see too much here that is all that unusual looking to me, but I am no expert on the normal exact setup of Tron lists. We do see fewer things perhaps just because there's no white splash in terms of non-creature spells that can come in against us, but you might see a Dismember. Mainly we're looking at the Thragtusks and the Thought-Knots as those kind of mid-costed value plays that can set us back and indeed compete with us, whether as threats in their own right or as ways to extend the game long enough for them to hardcast their haymakers. So still gotta respect the Tron. And that's my quick and dirty rundown of the top 32. I hope you guys liked it. I hope the things I pointed out were interesting to you. and were useful in terms of evaluating, just again, as a brief flyby way of doing so, evaluating some of the things to watch out for as we continue casting Thoughtseizes, turning Tarmogoyf sideways, and activating our Lilianas in this wide open, beautiful modern format. So let me know what you thought about my analysis of the green-black rock lists. Let me know what you thought about the rest of the top 32, both in terms of how it was in its own right and what the things I pointed out. And guys, don't forget to let me know what you think about my idea for donation leagues. To review that quickly, I want to start playing donation leagues for my supporters if they're interested in me doing so. And I want the money they're already donating to me on Patreon to go toward that threshold for donation leagues. Now, because that's going to be the case, we've got to keep the donation league threshold a little bit on the higher side. Otherwise, I'm going to be doing nothing on this channel but playing donation leagues, right? So we maybe want to keep it 40, 50, even 60. I don't know. I don't know what makes the most sense, but like, it's almost just another free reward in addition to the rewards that you're already getting and that people are already generously choosing to get down on. So if we have to make that number high, remember that it's not in a vacuum, it's in context of the other Patreon tier rewards. So let me know what you guys think about that, please. Above all, I would love to hear your feedback, and I thank you so much for watching. Stay tuned to the channel. I'm going to be playing some League content for you in the near future, starting, maybe I'll even get a whole video recorded and uploaded tomorrow. We'll have to see, but stay tuned because I've got more gameplay coming and I've got more of this type of content coming as well. I hope you enjoyed it. I look forward to hearing your feedback, and I hope you have a great night. I will talk to you soon.